Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razan Pereira. India is one of the latest countries to join the move to resist hostile business takeovers by China. Countries around the world have been tightening rules on foreign investments in critical sectors to ensure that their economies do not become vulnerable and exposed to foreign hands. As reports suggest that Beijing is on a buying spree owing to the coronavirus pandemic-induced economic downturn, the world as a whole is reconsidering relations with China in the face of increased investment in critical sectors by Chinese state-owned enterprises. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze how nations around the world are rethinking their FDI policies with China. Joining me on the program today are Elisabeth Braw, Senior Research Fellow, Modern Deterrence, Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies, Jayant Das Gupta, former Ambassador of India at the WTO, and we are also joined by Ashok Sajana, former Ambassador. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. So Elisabeth, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's first try and understand and try and analyze, because the European Union was among the first really to tighten foreign investment rules in recent weeks. You know, the UK also is very concerned about the Chinese hostile takeover. What has spooked Europe and what is it that they're most concerned about?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me on the program. So what has changed is really, I think that people have realized, people across the board have realized that China may not have the best of intentions. And the way that people have realized that is that the aid, the coronavirus aid that China has sent, and the way that it has acted throughout the coronavirus pandemic has been very much against the interests of other countries. And so I think people are waking up to the fact that China is really exploiting globalization in a way that's harmful to us, wherever our countries are located, to European countries, countries in Southeast Asia and so forth. And the main way that China so far has been building out its presence and power is by acquiring companies in these countries. And so far, the restrictions have only been on companies that are considered vital to national security. But as we have discovered, lots of companies can be vital to the country's best interest. So, for example, ventilators, that's not arms production, defense manufacturing, but it's vital to the country's interest. So people are realizing that we need to protect our economies better, because otherwise, in the crisis, even without the crisis, we'll be very dependent on China, and they may not act in our interest.
Okay, all right. So, Ms. Dasgupta, I'd like to bring you in here as well. You know, India too has taken a few steps to deal with this particular issue. You know, we've taken a review as far as our FDI policy is concerned. Take us through that.
We had a system by which investments from Pakistan and Bangladesh had to go through the government route. Before that, I must tell you that there are two avenues open for foreign investors. One is the automatic approval route, and that is except for a few industries like atomic energy, space, etc. Everything else is open. But there are sectoral investment caps. For instance, in banking, there is a cap, in insurance, there is a cap, etc. So the automatic route allows investors to come in and invest and inform the government of India later, within a prescribed period, of course. The second approach is for government approvals to be taken first before you can invest. So Pakistan and Bangladesh were in that category. Now we have extended it to include all the neighboring countries with which India has a land border. So we have included Myanmar, Bhutan, Nepal, and of course China, with whom we have the longest border. So that is there. And the reasons for that, of course, it was under consideration for the past few months. But the reason which triggered it off was the investment that the People's Bank of China made in the HDFC Bank, raising its investments from 0.8% of HDFC to 1.01%. So that rang an alarm bell. And of course, the Chinese investments have been in a few industries. And one of the most notable ones has been the pharma industry. The Chinese invested about $1.1 billion and bought up a sizable part of Gland Pharma, which represents approximately 17-18% of the entire Chinese investment in India. And as far as the unicorns are concerned, that is companies which are worth more than $1 billion, if we take the 23 of them at the last count, majority of them have some Chinese investment or the other. And China has investment in e-commerce also, including Paytm and Flipkart, for instance. So this, the reason why this decision has been taken is to prevent opportunistic takeovers and acquisitions and destabilizing the market. Because if the prices are down, as we all know, the Indian stock market went down by about 40%. Of course, it has recovered a little bit, but it is still down by about 25% from its peak in January. So if a foreign investor comes in and does it only for the short term for profit taking, and if there is a strategic interest involved, for instance, we have now realized, and most of the rest of the world also, that we are over-dependent on China for the pharmaceutical industry, especially the active pharmaceutical ingredients. So that is something which I think is under consideration of most governments. So this was one of the reasons, main reasons why India decided to move in this regard.
Okay, all right. Ambassador Sajana, let me bring you into the picture now. You know, as far as non-Chinese companies are concerned, they are facing massive disruptions all around the world. Do you believe that they are easy prey for Chinese companies at a time like this?
Oh, yes, absolutely, Frank. And this is true not only for India, but around the world, as you mentioned. And that is the reason why, you know, right at the beginning in your own introductory presentation, as also what Elisabeth has mentioned, we've seen around the world, whether it is in the United States, it is in Spain, it is in Australia, it is in Germany, France, Italy, across the board, decisions have been taken, and they have basically been focusing on hostile and predatory acquisitions by Chinese companies, because as we've been discussing over the last, let's say 2 months or so, when the stock markets have really been hit hard. In India, we have suffered a downsizing of our stock market by about 30 to 40%. So they can fall easy prey, because these companies, they also need money. So, and China, you know, the way it has come in as far as India is concerned, you know, it has taken over HDFC. Incidentally, it is not HDFC Bank that it has increased its investment in. It has increased its investment in HDFC Limited, which is a housing company. Now, there, of course, you know, we have to see, Frank, you would recall that when the Chinese President Xi Jinping had come here in September of 2014, we were discussing, at that time it was said that we had asked, you know, China should be investing in India in major infrastructure projects, etc. And you would recall that it was mentioned that over the next 5 years, China would be investing about $20 billion. Nothing happened really as far as that. So I think this is something that we have to balance, because India needs investment, to put into its manufacturing, into its industry, into its infrastructure. But it needs that investment at an appropriate level. It does not want that there should be a hostile takeover or a predatory acquisition of critical industries in India. We have a large number of sectors, you know, some of them Jayant mentioned, whether it is Paytm, whether it is Baiju, it is Flipkart, it is Snapdeal, it is Ola, it is Oyo, you name it across the board. As far as the startups are concerned, China is very heavily invested in that. But I think what really the government wants to see is some sectors, it is there is no problem. But some sectors in which there is criticality, there is a security, there are strategic interests are involved. There, I think the government wishes to consider and take a considered view whether China should be allowed to come in those sectors. So what has been done is removing China from the automatic approval route to the government route. And this, I think, what the Chinese government and also the embassy is saying that it is a violation of the WTO rules. It is not at all that, because it is just another process, another procedure that is being added. It is not creating any obstacles to the coming in of Chinese investment. When Chinese investment, there are proposals that are received, they will be considered by the government and will be dealt with expeditiously. So I think this argument by China that it is violative of the WTO and it goes against the commitment and agreement of G20 that there should be open, free, fair, transparent trade and investment rules. It doesn't go, ultra wires of that at all.
Okay. All right. So let me take that particular point forward with you, Elisabeth. So what is the bigger plan? What is it that China has as far as the bigger scheme of things are concerned? And can the Chinese juggernaut be stopped?
Well, so the plan that China is currently working on is the Made in China 2025 plan, where it wants to become a global powerhouse in a certain number of sectors. Not the sort of low-end manufacturing, but really sophisticated manufacturing of all kinds of technology and so forth. And so what's interesting is that they've given up their past habit of just buying household name Western companies or foreign companies simply to sort of have to show their clout. Instead, they are focusing on cutting-edge technology companies, and I think that's the risk for us in other countries, that these startups and emerging companies dealing with cutting-edge technology, they are not household names. Government regulators don't watch them every day, and they are and also because they are young companies, they are likely to be very severely hit by the coronavirus crisis. So they are very easy prey for Chinese acquisition attempts, and I think that's where we have to be. To pay close attention, because once those cutting-edge technology capabilities are gone from our countries, the companies may remain in our countries, but their know-how and expertise only benefits the Chinese owner. So that's where we have to pay close attention and expand, which is what many governments are doing, expand our definition of what constitutes a strategic interest or a strategic company.
Okay, all right. So, Mr. Dasgupta, so what are governments around the world really doing to try and address this particular issue? Certainly the Trump administration is concerned, is very worried about what's happening and what China might have up its sleeve. President Trump certainly wants to do something about this. But, as a whole, what are governments around the world doing?
The first thing which comes to mind is Australia, which has said that all investments will come under review and in future. So that has really, it is just another way of saying that government approval would be required. And Australia, as you know, is one of the most open countries in the world in terms of investment. Germany and Italy are also thinking of putting something similar in place. And I think what India has done, and Ambassador Sajanhar mentioned that, in the WTO, there is no agreement on investment yet. It is under consideration. Mandate also has not been obtained to start negotiating on investment facilitation. So the Chinese, I think, protest saying that India has violated the WTO rules is totally, I think, misplaced and wrong. The second point is that why are we, distinguishing China from the rest of the world? That is because it is common knowledge that approximately 80% of the companies in China are directly or indirectly controlled by the government. And China has a cash chest of more than $3 trillion. And if China, 80% of that also, China decides to invest and buy up shares at a throwaway price because the world is in a crisis, then it will get an enormous amount of dominance over the stock markets and companies all over the world. And if it is doing it in a strategic manner, then it could imperil the strategic interests of other countries. And the third point I wanted to mention is that the US, for instance, has been raising the flag, red flag, on Huawei. So this is also of a piece. It is a matter of strategic interest. India has also not really made up its mind on whether to allow Huawei to come into India and bid for government projects. The Americans have done it with respect to Dubai ports worldwide a few years ago when they wanted to take over Baltimore port. For strategic considerations, they didn't allow it. They didn't allow Fairchild, a chip maker, to be taken over. So there are plenty of instances of this kind all over the world. And because of our experience, one of the things which I wanted to mention in this context is when a country looks for foreign investment, it is not only money, it is also management practices, it is technology transfer, advanced technology, etc., which an acceptor country looks forward to having. Now, the experience that other countries have had with China is that China is not willing to part with its technology. Of course, there are problems with other countries as well, but China is one country which does not part with its technology at all. The second point is, as far as management practices is concerned, the Chinese have a different set of management principles by which they go. But India basically follows the Western model of management practices, and it's a very open system where decision making is transparent. There is a certain responsibility towards the board of directors, the shareholders. So we really, apart from the money part, we don't really, know really what China has in store for us. And
Right.
as far as its total investments into India are concerned, it's only about $8 billion right from 1991 till date. So that is not very much. And we have not put a full stop to Chinese investments coming into India. What we have said that it is just a kind of a scrutiny. And two, that the Chinese investments, can still be allowed. The government will review, and I'm sure it will do it very quickly on a case-to-case basis.
Right. Okay. All right. So, since we are here, Ambassador Sajanhar, the tweaking of FDI rules by India, that's something that we've been speaking about as well, and the Chinese have reacted to it too. Is it going to be a new flashpoint in the Sino-Indian bilateral relationship?
No, I don't think so. I think it is a very small thing as far as bilateral relations are concerned. And I think China also realizes in its heart of hearts that it does not have a strong case at all. And, India itself has been asking for Chinese investments, as I mentioned, even when Xi Jinping had come to India in September 2014. So we've been looking for Chinese investment. So this is, I think, what has raised the red flag at this moment, Frank, is that the manner in which China has conducted itself, the manner in which China has behaved over the last 3-4 months. Jayant mentioned about Huawei. I think it is many countries in the West, many countries in Europe, whether it was Britain or it was some of the other European countries, I think they were looking reasonably positively and favorably at dealing with Huawei, notwithstanding what America has been saying, notwithstanding what Mr. Trump has been saying. But I think after this episode, the manner in which China has behaved in terms of from 17th November till end of December, saying that, nothing is happening, even as far as the doctors who spoke about it, silencing them and tormenting them. So I think the countries in the West have realized what extent, the sort of political system, the authoritarian, autocratic political system in China, how harmful and how dangerous it can be, and also the fact that there is so much of dependence on China. You know, for instance, we are talking about 97% of the antibiotics in the United States are imported from China. Even as far as India is concerned, about 70 to 80% of our requirement of APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, we are dependent upon China. Similarly, in many other areas. So I think this has been a very huge shock and warning, I think, to the international system, to the global community as such, that too much of dependence on China is not helpful, is not a very good thing, and we need to work together. China, of course, has been saying that, you know, we gave a fair warning to the world, and it is because the Chinese system is better, that is why we have been able to control it, and democracies have not been able to control it. But I think this is a wrong way of looking at it. In terms of democracies, we need to work together, we need to look at it together and see how we can protect not only our own individual interests, but the collective interests of countries, and promote cooperation and collaboration amongst all these countries.
Absolutely. All right. Time now to get concluding remarks from all my guests with the best way forward. Starting first with you, Elisabeth. You know, do you believe that the bigger worry and the bigger concern is the fact that the Chinese are not going to stop with companies, but also going to expand to other things of strategic importance?
Yes, and in fact, I've been having conversations with people in the football world, elite sports world, who are telling me that China is trying to take advantage of our weakness in professional sports to buy some of our top athletes to, for example, build up a competing Indian elite football league. I mean, that's we may think of football or cricket or rugby or basketball, baseball as just a hobby, but actually it's big business. And so that's one area that I think we should pay attention to. So all of this is an attempt to exploit globalization, and we shouldn't. The answer is obviously not to reverse globalization, but just to be aware of it and look after our own countries better, and then not be naive about how business is conducted. And I think that's what's happening in different countries. And Australia was mentioned. Sweden just this week. Parliament approved expedited legislation that will then go through formal channels, but it has agreed informally already that all non-EU investments will require government approval, so not just strategic sectors, but all foreign investments. So that's a positive sign, and frankly, this needed to happen, and it's strange that coronavirus came and as was just said, opened people's eyes to Chinese obfuscation and exploitation of our global marketplace. So I think that if we think about the takeover so far, that has been bad news, but the piece of good news now is that governments are acting, and so we have a chance to save many of our most promising and most valuable companies and so forth.
Okay, all right. Mr. Dasgupta?
Some people have likened this whole phenomenon of China buying up shares at throwaway prices to a virtual Belt and Road initiative which China has in place for 63 countries. And instead of physical assets, it is buying up companies through which it can, again, control the economy in many ways. For instance, just to take the example of pharma, India has approximately 80 manufacturing companies in India, which is the largest for having FDA approvals of the US. So if China or any other country were to acquire a controlling share of these companies, it would have direct access to the European market, US market in a huge way. And I must mention that it was not China, but a Japanese company which had taken over one of the major pharmaceutical producing companies in India. And after that, because it was a strategic interest which was involved, India said that it would need to go through the brownfield investments and takeovers. They would need to go through the government route for pharma industry. Of course, it was subsequently relaxed, but the alarm bells had started ringing even then. So this is of a piece with what had happened. And finally, I must say, though it is slightly unkind to say it, the Chinese government has not shown a sense of responsibility and a sense of empathy, let's say, for the people who are suffering all over the world from coronavirus. And I think attitudes, from what I can see, are likely to harden towards Chinese investment, especially of the predatory and opportunistic kind.
Okay, all right. And Ambassador Sajjanath, close the show for us with the concluding remarks.
Frank, what I think is that it is not going to be post-corona whenever it comes. It is not going to be business as usual. I think countries are realizing what a threat and a danger it is to be so very dependent on China. We've been hearing so many voices from around the world. Just a few days ago, from UK, Dominic Raab, who's heading the government at the moment in place of Boris Johnson, he said that things are going to change very much. Similarly, we have heard from President of France, Emmanuel Macron also. I think across the world, there is going to be a huge pushback as far as China is concerned. And I think we need to work together to ensure, while there is cooperation, there is collaboration, that we are able to maintain our own, protect and promote our own interests, but also ensure that we are able to overcome the virus, the coronavirus, the pandemic, and move forward to normal times through cooperation and collaboration as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Absolutely. Cooperation and collaboration is of utmost importance. Let's hope that this pandemic comes to an end sooner rather than later, and we see some semblance of normalcy. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.